Okay, so thank you for coming, guys, to another class. We are about, well, halfway through the semester. Not quite there yet, but getting close to it. I'm allowing people to join. That's why I am pausing here and there. Anyway, let me explain the plan for today. So today there is no lecture. Because as you know, we are going to have our first exam this Friday. So what I am going to do first is to give you a basic idea of how the exam is going to be like. Then I am going to play a 10 minutes long video that I think is going to be it's a good summary of what we have seen in the last 3-4 weeks, that I think is going to spark some conversation for questions and things like that in preparation for the exam. So before I start, any questions, any comments? I see 23 people, well, 22 including me. That would be 23. But anyway, so here is the basic idea of the exam on Friday, okay? I already mentioned this, but let me repeat this. So the exam is going to consist of two parts. The first part is going to be a definition-based type of questions. So in that part, I am going to give you 7 options, and you only need to pick 5. Only need to pick 5 out of those 7. And basically, all you need to do is to define the term. Could be, I don't know, you already have a list or a sample. Could be encomienda, could be latifundio, could be raised to the bottom, could be any of those terms that we have been discussing. Let me change the view, hold up. Gallery, okay. Now, since you are going to be answering 5 questions in that part 1, that part 1 is going to be worth 25 points. That's 5 points each question. Now, the second part is going to be a short answer type of question. Now, in that one, I am also going to give you 7 options, 7 questions, but you only need to pick 3, right? So each question is going to be 25 points times 3, 75, plus the 25 points from part 1. That's your 100 points of the exam. Okay. In the past, I've had students that because they have time or for whatever reason that sometimes I cannot explain, they answer 4 questions or 5 questions, thinking that I may look into that question and I give this person some extra points. Don't do that. Don't do that. I am only going to grade 3 answers to 3 questions. Okay, so don't waste your time. Concentrate on those 5 definitions and on those 3 short answer questions. Now, this is the way it's going to work. I am going to give you 50 minutes, and I could say 1 hour, but by the time we get together and by the time we start dismissing, it's probably going to be more like 50 minutes. But let me share my screen with you so I can show you how this is going to work. Where is the, right here. I'm looking for the Canvas page. So right now you cannot see this because it has not been published. So I don't know, for those that know what I mean, let me explain this. So notice that this area right here, the circle in purple is not green, which means I have not published this, and that's why you cannot see it now. But on Friday, it's going to be green. And on Friday, what you need to do is essentially, let me clear this. What you need to do is to click here on midterm number 1, and you see this link right here is a hyperlink to a Word document right here. My drawing skills are not very good today. So you click there and then you download the exam. So, I mean, this is going to take you, what, 60 seconds at the most, maybe even less than that. And then remember, this class is not about, let me stop sharing this. Remember, this class is not about graphs, equations, tables. This class is more about ideas. So all you need to do is that is to type. You need to type on your computer or whatever device you are using the answer. Once you finish your exam, save it. Make sure somewhere your exam has your name. You know, since it's coming to my email, I don't think I'm going to have any problems. But just in case, make sure your name has your exam has your name on it, and send it to me. So the point is that by 3 o'clock, you need to be clicking that send button, emailing your answers to me. Does that make sense? All right, let's see. Questions, comments about this particular issue of the structure of the exam and other things. Cooper, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So when is it going to be available? Because you said it has to be turned in by 3. When is it open?
No. I mean, we are going to get together. You are going to have 1 hour. So, I am expecting you guys to be here on the screen with me. I mean, you can turn your camera off, whatever. I don't mind. I just want to make sure that you are here answering the exam. So it's going to be available at, I don't know, 1 minute before 2 o'clock. So that by 2 o'clock, when I open the session, it's already available and you can start right away. Does that make sense, Cooper?
Okay, yeah. So we are meeting at 2 o'clock here, and we just take it for that hour.
Correct.
That we will be. Okay.
Correct. If I don't do it this way, I mean, even if I ask you not to look at your notes and not to look at, whatever, I know it's going to happen. And, that defeats the purpose of, even under these conditions, I anticipate that, I may need to be careful with, reading and making sure that you are not just copying and pasting stuff. I really want you guys to use your own words. And I am pretty flexible. I'm pretty lenient. I mean, I'm not one of those professors that, oh, no, you're missing this word. Oh, no. I've done this so many times that I can very quickly determine whether what the answer to a particular question, or whether you get the gist of the definition, things like that. So, please try hard to use your own words. Try not to peek. Try not to look at your notes. This is supposed to be a closed book, closed note, close everything. So that's the plan. 50 minutes starting at 2 o'clock. By 3 o'clock, you're supposed to be emailing me your exam straight to my email account. Yep.
Do you want us to make like a PDF doc, or is it going to be a text box entry?
No. It's not PDF, because if you send me a PDF, it's hard for me to edit or to comment. Now, when you click on that link, it's going to be a Word document.
Okay.
Keep it as a Word document. Just enter your answers, save it. You may want to save it right away, or as soon as you answer something, in case something happens, you don't have to start again. But anyway, the point is, Word document. Send it to me in that format, so I can actually grade it and type in a different color comments or whatever it's necessary. And I am going to send you back the graded exam with some comments as well. Good question, Sandeep. Yes, Jacob.
So for the short answer questions, do you have like a kind of like range of like size that you're looking for? How in depth do you want us to go?
Yeah, how short is short, right? Yeah, I mean, I expect this to be concise answers. Normally, a good answer that includes most, if not all, of the elements that I'm looking for is probably around 2 to 3 paragraphs, 2 to 3 sentences each. Not very long, not very long. In some cases, I am asking you to, list and describe or list and explain. Now, you may have more sentences than that because they may be like 6 or 7 points or whatever. But you get the idea, 2 to 3 paragraphs, 2 to 3 sentences each, average. Sometimes, like I said, some answers require to be a bit longer, but sometimes they don't have to be that long, actually. Good question,
Okay,
Jacob.
thank you.
Yep. I'm looking for another hand, another comment. You still have your hand up, Jacob. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so this is what I am going to do. I really want to play this video that I think I mentioned a class or 2 classes ago about what happened in Bolivia in the 1980s. Because Bolivia is one of those examples of hyperinflation that happened during the 80s in Latin America that people in my field are aware of, but not very many people are. And it's well done. This documentary is very well done, and shows people like Jeffrey Sachs and influential people in government at those during those years that made the decisions and all that. But also he's talking about dependency theory, the IMF, all of that in just 10 minutes. So I think that this is going to hopefully spark some conversation again in preparation for Friday. So let's see. Let me increase the volume first. And let me now share this screen. And then here I go. It's 9 minutes and 58 seconds, guys. Please pay attention. Actually, it's entertaining and it's well done, I think. Hold on, I think I forgot to click an important button so that you can actually listen clearly. There we go, share sound. I don't know what's happening. Hold on, give me a second. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I got it.
One of the poorest countries in Latin America, and with a history of 189 military coups, Bolivia was also one of the most unstable.
When I was going to college in Texas, first question you'd be asked is, who's the president of Bolivia this week? Second question down the road was, you're from Bolivia. Ah, Bolivia. What's the inflation rate in Bolivia this week? Because we had galloping hyperinflation that destroyed our economic base.
We found that Bolivia was the 7th highest inflation in the history of man.
23,500%. Prices increased by the hour.
The cost of food and clothes kept increasing. Before it was all over, the total inflation averaged 1% every 10 minutes.
7 out of 10 Bolivians live in poverty. The poor people get hurt even more. They see their pockets be eaten away by inflation that is galloping around.
It's like a tiger. Hyperinflation, if you don't kill it, then you only have one bullet. It'll eat you.
The root of the problem was government finances. The government was spending 30 times more than it received in taxes. Across the continent, Latin America's uncompetitive economies had been piling up debt. In the 1970s, a massive hike in world oil prices left foreign banks awash with petrodollars.
So here were the international banks with billions of dollars and nowhere to earn interest on it. They discovered Latin America.
We were offered unreasonable amounts of money. These banks, who are very unwise in their lending policy, came to the happy conclusion that countries don't go broke. It's true, but sometimes they don't pay.
Guess what? One day, these countries could no longer afford to repay their debts.
In 1982, a financial crisis in Mexico triggered a chain reaction that caused the 1980s to be known as Latin America's lost decade.
Bolivia was probably the most severe case of how things had gone wrong in Latin America. For decades, they just printed money. They collected no taxes. You can't collect taxes, you have to make money up somehow, and so you just printed it.
Bolivia was a basket case. We were considered hopeless. We had help from nobody. We were totally alone. The World Bank had closed its office. The IMF had pulled out its representative. And the American government and other friendly nations wouldn't answer the telephones.
At 29, economist Jeff Sachs had just become one of Harvard's youngest full professors ever.
In 1985, some former students sent me a note asking whether I would be ready to come to a meeting with a group of visiting Bolivians.
The Bolivians had come to Harvard to take part in a seminar on the hyperinflation that was ravaging their country.
I was absolutely fascinated, made a few observations. Somebody in the back of the room piped up and said, "Well, if you think you know what to do, you come to La Paz." When I got to La Paz in July 1985, the inflation rate was about 60,000%. It was an extraordinary and terrifying thing to see, actually. It was a society at the edge of the precipice.
Goni's party did win the election, and he became Minister of Planning. He told the president that Bolivia was running out of time.
We told him, you have 90 days before Bolivia's hyperinflation becomes the highest inflation in world history. So he told us, okay, you have 20 days, you have to start working now.
There was a big discussion whether you could stop hyperinflation or inflation period by taking gradual steps. In this, Jeff Sachs was influential. He's had all this gradual stuff that just doesn't work. When it really gets out of control, you got to stop it. Like in medicine, you got to take some radical steps, otherwise your patient is going to die.
To avoid leaks, they worked at home. Every few days, Goni reported to the president.
We said, look, boys, you got one chance. And remember, as Machiavelli says, all the bad news at once, the good news little by little. So he said, get it all done. Shock therapy is get it over, get it done, stop hyperinflation, and then start rebuilding your economy so you achieve growth.
In August 1985, Goni went public with a program called shock therapy.
It caught everybody by surprise. It had great credibility. It was a shock.
Shock therapy spelled the death of dependency theory. Government spending was slashed. Price controls were scrapped. Import tariffs were cut. Government budgets were balanced.
We didn't use highly sophisticated economic theory to deal with hyperinflation. We just used very simple things, such as from now on, the government will only spend what it gets. You get 1 peso, spend 1 peso. You get 2 pesos, spend 2 pesos. If we don't have it, we don't spend it. No borrowing from the central bank, and therefore the central bank did not have to print money.
Shock therapy meant that the price of essentials, transport, food, fuel, all shot up. Until then, people had thought that only a military dictatorship like Chile's could impose such tough measures without tearing society apart.
Bolivia may be a small country, but it had a very big impact in terms of kickstarting reform throughout Latin America. In Brazil, a former professor who actually used to teach the dependency theory launched a program of economic reform that looked a lot like shock therapy. Argentina was suffering from 20,000% inflation, and the new president of that country said, you know, we've seen this movie before.
Pro-market reforms could be implemented under a democracy, and we demonstrated that it was possible here in Argentina.
All across Latin America, governments began to sit up and take notice.
I think the Bolivian experience did have influence. The fact that we did it in democracy, we did it without great social violence, had impact on economic thinkers and on politicians.
All right, guys, let me stop this. All right. So, any comments, any reactions, guys?
Like I know a few ways, like to lower inflation by decreasing the money supply, but I'm curious, like, is it as easy as like just not printing as much money?
Mm-hmm.
Like if they want to, couldn't they just like stop printing that much money? Or
Yeah.
is it more complicated than that?
It is a bit more complicated, David, but the essence is right there. In fact, that's what Jeffrey Sachs proposed. And this is what was called shock therapy. So many times in the past, what governments in different countries have tried to do is to slowly decrease the growth in the money supply. But that type of policy is not very credible, because at any point in time, the government can increase the speed at which the money supply grows. So Jeffrey Sachs said, no, you need to do this all at once, shock therapy. You know, that's the idea of the bullet to kill the tiger. If you do it once and you do it decisively and you do it quick, it worked. And it did in the case of Bolivia. In different countries, like in Mexico, they have something called the PACT, P-A-C-T, where rather than unilaterally the government deciding to do, what to do with the money supply, trying to minimize inflation. In Mexico, for example, they did that pact, which involved the private sector the government sector, and many other people came to the table and they said, okay, how do we deal with inflation? And so they had discussions and conversations. Different countries have a different way to deal with inflation. The case of Bolivia is interesting because it was the highest inflation in the region because it was completely out of control. You know, there are stories like this that, for you are gonna, you probably are gonna say, nah, no way, professor, but it's true, it's true. So you will go out with your friends or whatever to have a coffee, and I think I mentioned this before, you will ask for the menu at the restaurant, and the menu didn't have any prices printed because nobody wanted to commit to a price that 2 or 3 hours later was going to be, 2, 3, 4, 10% higher. So it was actually advised that you pay for your coffee in advance, because if you waited, an hour, it was going to be more expensive. Think about that. And the problem with hyperinflation is that, you saw this guy at the beginning talking about this galloping inflation eating your pocket away. What does that mean, right? Well, when the price level is going up dramatically and in a fast way, the purchasing power of your money, the analogy of keeping it in your pocket is like keeping it in the bank, right? But the point is, you don't want to keep your assets in money when the inflation is going up, because the price is going to start going up higher, and you keep the same amount of money. So the ability to buy with the same amount of money is going to be smaller because now the prices are higher. So with that in mind, what do you think people are going to do? They're going to spend the money before it loses purchasing power. And that feeds inflation even higher, because when people go out and start demanding more milk, more cars, more whatever, the demand for those things goes up and the price goes even higher, right? So this is why, controlling hyperinflation can be very, very, very difficult, because expectations in the mind of consumers are very, very powerful, and they vote with their money, So I think I went sideways, David, but hopefully I answered your question. Yeah. Anybody else? I saw Jacob first.
So I just had a quick question, kind of bridging off of that. What were some of the popular assets that people kept their money in? Was it just like gold, silver, things like that were easily traded? Because I would imagine with this inflation going on for such a long period, people would have to convert to some other method than just using the standard Bolivian pesos or Argentinian pesos.
Yeah. Well, if you're talking about people with the means to do it, yes, they would buy, precious metals, big, homes, boats, cars. But that's the minority. The minority in Latin America was able to do that. No, I'm talking about spending your money in things like a TV set, a refrigerator, things that you are going to need, but that if you wait, they're going to be more expensive. And in some cases, it was just food and clothes. You will start piling up on, 20 pounds of rice and, 40 pounds of beans. The vast majority of the population didn't have the means to protect themselves by buying gold and silver and cars and homes, all these assets. They couldn't do that. So that's why you also see this inflation go even higher and faster, because the way most countries calculate inflation rates is based on this basket of goods that the vast majority of the population buys, not in the consumer price index. I would be surprised if any country includes gold. The gold is not part of the CPI. It's milk, it's shoes, is TV sets, refrigerators, things like that. So those are the type of things that people start buying to protect themselves against inflation, Jacob. Right? Cody.
Yeah, so once hyperinflation was sort of controlled and the economies of Bolivia and Argentina were sort of stabilized, what was the reasoning for returning or sort of welcoming the IMF and the World Bank back into the countries, considering they sort of abandoned them when they wrote them off? It seems kind of counterintuitive to go back to the same people that sort of said, screw you 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, okay, hold on. This documentary, although was produced by PBS, and you will think, oh, well, it's pretty neutral and all that, they don't mention, at least the way I would, the influence of the IMF and the World Bank in the implementation of these price controls, including shock therapy. So, I mean, it's not that they invite them back, the IMF and the World Bank. They actually were always around. I mean, of course, when things were completely out of control, they left and said, you guys are on your own. But then when they realized that that crisis was not just Bolivia, but it was a regional crisis that was going to impact major international banks because of the petrodollars and oil, the involvement of oil-rich nations, they realized, oh, we cannot leave these guys alone. We need to intervene. So in different shapes and at different times, they start influencing economic policy making in Mexico, in Argentina, in Bolivia. But of course, every country is different. So they had to put basically the Washington Consensus Plan, which, if you remember, includes financial liberalization, deregulation, all of these things. But one key element is the public finances reform, which basically is what shock therapy is. You guys need to stop printing money as a means to finance the federal government. You cannot do that. If you don't have the money with tax revenue, you cannot spend it because that spirals up inflation. So this shock therapy is one of the key ingredients of the Washington Consensus anyway. So, Jeffrey Sachs from Harvard and Goni, the finance minister, they don't mention the IMF, on top of them, because they want to look like it was their it was their decision. Obviously, I mean, they implemented the program, they implemented the policies, but behind them, the IMF was always looking, because they basically said, if you want to have access to finances, international reserves, you have to do this. Do it any way you want. In Mexico, you can do the pact. Here in Bolivia, you can use shock therapy. In Argentina, you can do it do it wherever you want, but do it. That was basically the message. You have to control inflation. You have to implement all these policies. Otherwise, you are not going to have access to these funds, right? Does that make sense, Cody?
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Jacob, you still have your hand up. I'm not sure if it's a remnant or you have another question.
That was an accident. I forget it never actually lowers down.
Yeah. Now, while you think about other comments or questions, let me also remind you that this movie taking place or happening in Latin America in the 80s, remember that in Chile, because of the Chicago Boys, they had seen the movie 10 years earlier. Now, the difference was that in Chile, all of this happened under a military authoritarian regime, not democracy. It was the military junta that said, okay, let's do this, let's do that. So many people in Latin America thought, as Sachs and Goni in the video that we just saw were trying to explain, many people in Latin America thought that the only way to implement these drastic measures was under a military regime. But that was not the case. In the 80s, most Latin American economies were already democracies. So, in a way, this was a very shocking element in terms of economics, but also in terms of politics, because nobody expected that, policymakers, domestic policymakers, were going to make such dramatic decisions that were going to impact in such a big way to their own populations, right? Anton, please go ahead.
Kind of a two-part question here. First is, how is even that hyperinflation that sustainable at that extreme? Obviously, regular inflation, you know, if I have $10 in my pocket, you know, a month from now, that's going to be less. But when you're literally saying hours, how do people even have enough money to continue to spend? You know, if they have $100 and it's worth $1 by the end of the day, especially when you have the lower income people, it's how does that fire just not snuff itself out? Because like you just said, the spending is what actually increases it. And then the second question is how detrimental were because obviously if you do shock therapy, there's going to be a dramatic effect to that same population. How long did it basically last before something started to actually work correctly?
Yeah, good questions. Let me answer the second question first, okay? Or the second part first. Now, remember, the 1980s in Latin America is known as the lost decade. So the quick answer to your question is at least 10 years, Anton. All these problems in Latin America lasted almost 10 years, in some countries more, in some countries less, but during this decade, inflation was going up very quickly, unemployment rate was up, poverty rate, inequality, all of the bad indicators were getting worse, were getting worse. So it took a very, very long time to get this under control as a region. Again, in some countries, they achieve this faster, sometimes more painfully, in more painful ways than others. So it's hard to give you okay, 10 years everywhere now, because different places implemented different policies at different time. But in general, as a region, 10 years. Now, let me go back to your first question. The answer is unsustainable, and poor people suffer the most, because rich people can shelter from hyperinflation, like I said, buying assets, homes, boats, watches, whatever, expensive stuff that is going to retain its value. But the problem is, poor people. So this didn't happen in Bolivia, but has happened in other places like Ecuador, and more recently in Venezuela. So when the inflation rate is going up very quickly and you cannot maintain the value of your currency stable, not just as a government, but also as a family, as a person, you start looking for alternatives to store value, right? That they don't have to, you don't have to be rich to buy a car. I'm sorry, you need to be rich to buy a car, or you need to be rich to buy a home. So you cannot do that. But for example, in the most recent case of Venezuela or Ecuador in the 80s, the black market for foreign currency emerges. So people start, because of remittances or smuggling or coming from illegal means, kidnapping, drugs. There are many ways to introduce dollars or euros into a poor economy, like, the case of Venezuela, like the case of Ecuador. So what people start doing is to start buying dollars, because the dollar is going to shelter against inflation. And you probably only have, I don't know, 10, you only have money to buy $100, $500 if you're lucky. But that's a lot better and a lot less difficult than having to come up with the money to buy a car or to buy a house, like rich people could do it. So in poor neighborhoods, what you see is process of dollarizing the domestic economy, which is crazy because normally every country has a different foreign exchange regime. So they may say, okay, we have a floating exchange rate, which basically means supply and demand are going to dictate the price of a dollar. But when this happens, obviously the government has to step in and they say, we are going to establish an official exchange rate, which basically is a control price. You cannot pay more, you cannot pay less, but this amount. And this is what I mean by a black market. When you have a price control, automatically, in most of the cases, you have the emergence of a black market, in this case for dollars. And that's how many people start storing value as a shelter against hyperinflation. So this didn't happen in Bolivia because, these guys, well, obviously knew what they were doing at the time, in the 80s. Although I'm sure narco trafficking and many other industries were already there, they are not of the size, magnitude, and prevalence as these industries have now in South and Central America. So, it could have happened. It didn't, but it could have. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Anton?
Yeah, more or less. I thought about, could the dollar be that protection? So,
yeah.
Yes.
Yes. But again, very few countries, and I cannot think of anyone right now. Well, obviously Venezuela right now. But anyway, the point is that most countries typically don't allow nationals to open bank accounts in foreign countries. They want to keep their money in. So anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that this is the reason you have to do this illegally in a black market, because you cannot open up a bank account in dollars in your own country. You will have to go out, and that's tough. That's very difficult. Anybody else, guys? Any other question or comment? Good questions, by the way. I was hoping that the video will spark some. Dylan, please go ahead.
So is Evo Morales of Bolivia, is she kind of part of the new left with the response to the shock therapy?
Evo Morales is, in a way, part of the new left, and I am going to expand this answer later, Dylan. But remember, the new left, and we will see this in a week or so, typically is split in two, the radicals and the not so radicals, right? So on the not so radicals, you have people like Lula da Silva, people that were more understanding, more reasonable. On the radical camp, you have Hugo Chavez, and of course now Evo. I'm sorry, you said Evo Morales, Dylan? Yeah, you said Evo Morales. I was thinking about the current president of Venezuela. So my bad. But yes, Evo Morales is also considered on the radical camp of the new left. And we are going to talk about that. What's the origin of Evo Morales? He was a coca leader. Think about it. Normally we think of Colombia as the origin of all these drugs, and that's partially true, but there are many other countries like Peru, certainly Bolivia, they grow a lot of coca, but they don't do it for the reasons that you're thinking about. If you go to Bolivia, you go to Peru, they actually chew coca leaves. We in the US, we drink coffee, we drink tea, right? To get, a pick-me-off, half day through so that you can keep going with your day, whatever. Well, what they do is they chew coca leaf, and or they actually, you can go to I don't know if you have seen this, but you can go to a grocery store in Bolivia or Peru, and you can buy the same way we buy energy bars or candy bars here in the US that are made with whatever, rice. Well, you can buy coca energy bars. They use coca for makeup too. I mean, the use of coca is just immense. the problem is that, you know, it has such a bad reputation because of course, can also be used to produce drugs, and most of them come to the US. But the point is that, yes, Evo Morales is one of those radical guys that I don't know exactly where he is now, but you probably have seen the news that things didn't go well for him in Bolivia, and he had to literally run away. And the only place that was welcoming him was Mexico. So I think he's still living in Mexico in a self, I don't know how to call it. You know, he doesn't want to admit it, but basically he had to run away because he was in troubles. And now he's trying to control from Mexico wherever he left in Bolivia, but things are not going very well for him. Yeah, we can talk about that, Dylan. Yeah. I saw another hand, but I don't see it anymore. Perhaps it was you, Cody. We have like 4 minutes.
Yeah, but my question was kind of a long-winded question, so we can talk about it some other time.
Yeah, yeah. I know some of you are probably eager to start talking about the new left. You know, okay, what's happening right now? I mean, why Latin America is so messy and all that. But believe me, if we don't go through all of this first half, you know, these first 7-8 weeks, explaining the second half is going to be impossible. You know, we have to go back and explain. So now I hope that you feel that you have a good foundation to understand decisions, policies, actors, interactions, not just within Latin America, but also with the US and the rest of the world. So we'll get there. We'll get there, guys. Yeah. Okay, any other question or comment for the exam on Friday? Is all clear? All right, let me get to the second page. Just make sure I don't see any hands. Okay, well, I'm like 2-3 minutes short, but that's okay. I think this is a good time to stop. I will see you guys on Friday sharp at 2 o'clock for your midterm, okay? If you have questions or comments in between now and then, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have, all right? I'm gonna stop recording now.